Have you ever heard a strange noise in your house at night and tried to tell yourself it was just the wind? That's what 11-year-old Emmett did. But some sounds refuse to be ignored. Welcome to a collection of 3 chilling tales about ordinary kids and the unsettling discoveries they make in their own homes. We'll start with Emmett, who hears something in his bedroom wall. Then we'll meet Lena, who finds a strange light glowing in her attic. And finally, Nolan, who learns a dark secret about the friendly man who waves at him every evening. Get ready, because after these stories, you might never look at your own home the same way again. Here's part 1, The Whisper Behind the Wall. When I was 11, my mom and I moved into a small house on a street called Hickory Lane. She said it was temporary, just until she got back on her feet after the divorce. It was an old single-storied place with faded yellow paint and walls so thin you could hear a pin drop in the next room. My older cousin, Trevor, came to stay with us that first summer because my mom didn't like the idea of me being alone after school. My room was the smallest one, tucked away at the end of the hallway. It barely had enough space for my bed, a desk, and a little shelf for my books. The wallpaper was peeling in one corner, and the ceiling fan made a rattling sound when it spun. I didn't mind it. At first it felt like the house was breathing, alive in its own way. The first time I heard the whisper, it was late. Trevor was still awake in his room, laughing quietly while talking to someone on his phone. As I was trying to drift off, I heard something faint through the wall near my bed. It sounded like someone whispering, slow and drawn out. I figured it was the TV from the living room, but it was too close. Like the sound was trapped right there, between the wallboards. I pressed my ear against the cool plaster, and I could hear words, but they were fuzzy and unclear. They were soft, like a breath, like someone trying to form a sentence that never quite finished. The next morning, I told my mom about it. She just smiled and said, "Old houses make noises. Pipes, wind, animals," she said. "There's always something." For a day or two, I believed her. But the whisper came back. Always after midnight, always soft and slow. One night, on a strange impulse, I whispered back. I just said, "Hello." For a moment, everything went silent. Then the voice answered. It didn't sound like English, more like a long, mournful sigh, stretched into words. My skin prickled. I yanked the blanket over my head and stayed like that, heart pounding, until the sun came up. A few days later, Trevor started complaining that his phone calls were getting weird interference. He said sometimes he'd hear faint voices echoing on the line, even when no one else was talking. He joked that the house had bad reception because of ghosts. I forced a laugh, but deep down, a cold dread settled in my stomach. I didn't think he was really joking. One afternoon, while Mom was at work, Trevor decided to show me something. He knocked on my bedroom wall and said, "Listen." We both leaned in close. There was a hollow echo behind the plaster, not solid like a normal wall should be. He thought maybe there was an empty space, like a hidden crawl area. That night, the whisper returned, but this time, it was louder. I could almost make out a word. It sounded like it was saying, "Come." I froze, my blood running cold. I didn't answer. A few minutes later, I heard scratching from inside the wall. Light, slow scratches, like fingernails, dragging across old wood. I bolted out of my bed and ran to Trevor's room, shaking him awake. He grabbed a flashlight, and we both pressed our ears to my wall. At first, nothing. But when he clicked off the light, plunging us into darkness, we both heard it. 3 soft, deliberate knocks from inside the wall. Trevor's face went pale in the moonlight. He didn't say anything for a long time. The next day, he told Mom that maybe there were rats or raccoons in the wall. She called a handyman to check it out. The man came over, cut a small, neat square near the corner of my room, and shined his powerful light inside. He peered in for a few minutes and then pulled back, shaking his head. He said there was no nest, no droppings, no signs of animals at all, just an empty space between 2 studs, sealed up tight. After he patched the hole, the house felt different, quieter, heavier. That night, I tried to sleep, but my eyes refused to close. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, every creak and groan of the house amplified in the silence. Finally, I turned on my lamp and my heart stopped. A faint crack was forming on the fresh plaster where the patch had been made. And then I heard it again. It wasn't whispering this time. It was breathing. A slow, steady, raspy breath right behind the wall, right beside my head. I didn't sleep for the rest of that night or the night after. I just listened to the house breathe. When I was 12, my family moved into my grandparents' old farmhouse. They had passed away, and my parents figured it would save us money. Plus, my little brother and I would have more space to play. The house sat at the very end of a long gravel road, surrounded by cornfields, so tall they looked like walls. Past those fields were woods that turned almost pitch black right after sunset. It was the kind of quiet that feels heavy. My new room was on the second floor, right underneath the attic. I didn't mind it at first. In fact, I kind of liked the old, creaking sounds the ceiling made whenever the wind pushed against the roof. It felt like the house was breathing. But there was one thing that happened every single night that I just couldn't explain. Even though there was no power outlet, no light fixture, nothing up there, a dim yellow light would shine through the cracks of the attic door. It wasn't bright, just a faint, sickly glow that painted a thin line across the ceiling of my room. I told my dad about it one morning over breakfast. He just shrugged and said it was probably the moon. But that didn't make any sense. The glow was clearly coming from inside the attic, not through a window. I even tried to show him how the line of light was always in the exact same spot, no matter where the moon was in the sky. He just brushed it off, told me not to worry, and to finish my cereal. A few nights later, the sounds started. Footsteps. Slow, dragging steps right above my head. They made the ceiling creak in these long, drawn-out groans. My first thought was maybe it was a raccoon or some other animal that had gotten in. But the sound was too heavy, too steady. It sounded like someone walking barefoot, pacing back and forth. I looked up and saw tiny bits of dust and paint flakes raining down from the boards above me. A part of me wanted to bolt out of that room and never come back. But another part, a stupidly curious part, kept me frozen in my bed, just listening. The next day, I knew I had to see for myself. I found the old pull cord for the attic hatch in the hallway, its frayed string covered in cobwebs. I gave it a hard tug. The ladder dropped down with a soft, muffled thud, releasing a rush of stale air that smelled like old paper and something faintly sour, like spoiled milk. I took a deep breath and started to climb. I only made it a few steps up before I stopped, my heart pounding in my throat. There, hanging in the center of the attic, was an old glass bulb, and it was glowing, a weak, pathetic light, humming like a trapped fly. There were no wires connected to it. It was just on. The rest of the attic looked like someone had once lived up there. Tucked into a corner was a small iron bed frame with a thin, stained mattress. A dusty full-length mirror was leaning against the far wall, and a few broken wooden toys were scattered near a large, dome-topped trunk. My first thought was to ask my mom if one of our relatives used to stay up here, maybe a cousin I'd never met. But something about the stillness, the heavy sour air, made my chest feel tight, like a band was squeezing it. As I turned to go back down, I glanced at the mirror one last time and caught a faint reflection in the grimy glass. It wasn't me. It was a girl, standing behind the bed. Her hair was long and tangled, almost covering her face. Her head was tilted to the side, as if she was trying to get a better look at me. I blinked hard, and just like that, she was gone. I didn't wait to see if she'd come back. I scrambled down that ladder so fast it rattled against the frame, and I didn't stop running until I was outside in the bright sun. That night, I couldn't get her out of my head. I left every light on in my room, but the fear was still there, crawling under my skin. I must have eventually started to doze off, because I was woken up by a faint, unfamiliar sound. It was the creak of the attic ladder. I looked toward my bedroom door, which I'd left wide open, and saw the attic hatch in the hallway ceiling swaying slightly. It shouldn't have been moving. And then I saw it, a hand, a small, pale hand, gripping the edge of the opening. I dove under my blanket, shaking so hard I thought the bed would break. I could hear the ladder steps creak, one by one, as someone slowly, deliberately, climbed down. The air in my room turned frigid. and that smell from the attic dust and something like old, rotting flowers filled my nostrils. I squeezed my eyes shut, holding my breath, until the creaking stopped right beside my bed. Silence. I couldn't stand it. I had to look. Through a tiny slit in my blanket, I peeked out. I could see the outline of the girl, standing there. Her face was faintly illuminated by that same strange, yellow glow that seemed to come from inside her. Her eyes were wide and completely empty, like two dark holes, like she'd been staring into nothing for 100 years. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, I heard a whisper right inside my own head. It was soft and trembling, like a broken music box. It said, "You found my room." I screamed. It was a raw, terrified sound I didn't even recognize as my own. My parents came bursting in, flipping on the light. The girl was gone. When I looked up, the attic door was shut tight, the ladder pulled up, as if it had never been touched. My parents told me I must have had a nightmare, that the move was just stressing me out. The next morning, I was determined to prove I wasn't crazy. I dragged my dad into the hallway. "Just look," I pleaded. "You'll see the light bulb." He sighed, but he pulled down the hatch. As it opened, I braced myself for that sour smell, for the sight of that bed. But there was nothing. The attic was dark. It was completely empty. There was no bed, no mirror, no broken toys. Just dust, cobwebs, and bare wooden beams. He looked at me with a mix of pity and frustration, and I just stood there, completely defeated. That night, I lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling. The yellow line of light was gone. For a second, I felt a wave of relief. But then, as my eyes adjusted to the dark, I noticed something that made my stomach twist into a cold, hard knot, faintly visible in the thin layer of dust on the ceiling boards. Right above my bed was the perfect outline of a handprint, and it was pressed from the inside. Thanks for listening to my story. If you have a spooky tale of your own, I'd love to hear it in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more chills. Stay safe out there. When I was 10, my favorite thing to do after school was ride my bike around the block. It was one of those perfect, quiet neighborhoods where every lawn looked the same and you could smell fresh-cut grass in the evenings. My mom loved it. It was safe, predictable. But there was this one house on the corner that always pulled my attention. It had a tall, iron fence, a yard that was more patches than grass, and a huge maple tree that bent so low it almost touched the sidewalk. The paint was peeling, the windows were dusty, but it didn't look abandoned. At least, I didn't think it was. Every single afternoon, there was a man standing in that yard, right by the fence. He always wore the same thing, a brown hat and a long gray coat, even on the warmest days. And every time I rode past, he'd wave. He never stepped off his property, never even crossed the sidewalk. I'd always wave back, because that's just what polite kids do. He had a friendly smile, but his eyes, they were always so dark, like they couldn't quite catch the light. One day, he actually called out to me. He asked about my bike, said it was the exact same color as the one his son used to ride. I told him I really liked the red paint, and he let out this soft laugh. It was the kind of laugh that sounded both kind and incredibly tired. After that day, it became our routine. He'd be there, same spot, same coat, same smile. He'd ask if school was going well, or if my mom was still baking cookies on the weekends. The weird part, I never told him those things. He just knew. After a few weeks of this, a little feeling of unease started to creep in. I realized I'd never seen him go back inside his house. I never saw any lights on in the windows at night, either. It was always just dark. So, I decided to mention him to my mom. Her brow furrowed and she asked, "What man?" I described him, the guy with the hat at the corner house. She just shook her head and told me that house had been empty since before we even moved in. I thought she had to be joking. The next day I was determined to prove her wrong. I rode by again, heart pounding a little, and there he was, same as always, leaning against the fence. I got brave and told him, "My mom said nobody lives here." His smile didn't fade, but his head tilted just slightly, like he was confused by the thought. Then he said, Your mother's wrong. I never left. I didn't know what that meant, and I wasn't about to stick around to find out. I pedaled home faster than I ever had in my life. That night, sleep was impossible. Every time a car drove by, the headlights would sweep across my curtains, and all I could think about was that house. Curiosity finally won. I crept to my window and peered down the street. The corner house was just barely visible through the trees. No lights, no movement. But as my eyes adjusted to the dark, I saw it. A shape standing near the fence. The man in the hat. He was looking up the street, looking right toward my house. I ducked away from the window and just waited for morning to come. The next day, I needed another opinion. I went over to my neighbor, Mrs. Dalton, and asked her if anyone had ever lived in that corner house. She looked surprised by the question. She told me it used to belong to a man named Mr. Hearn, but he'd passed away a long, long time ago. She said the city had been trying to sell the property for years, but nobody ever wanted it. After that conversation, I stopped riding my bike that way. I took the long way around, no matter what. For a while, things felt normal again. But then one Sunday afternoon, my mom asked me to return a library book, and of course, the shortest route went right past the corner. I told myself it was just a house, just a silly story I'd made up. As I turned the corner, I felt the air change. It was colder. The yard looked completely different, overgrown, choked with weeds. The iron gate was half fallen off its hinges, and he wasn't there. I slowed down, feeling this wave of relief wash over me, until my eyes landed on the porch. The brown hat. It was sitting there, perfectly upright, like it was brand new, untouched by any dust or dirt. Just then, a breeze picked up and knocked the hat off the step. And underneath it, for just a split second, I saw a handprint. It wasn't made of dirt or paint. It was impressed into the wood, like the hand that made it had sunk right through the surface. I didn't even think. I just turned my bike around and rode home without looking back. Years later, after we'd moved away, I looked up our old address online out of curiosity. I found an old newspaper article about the house. It said a man named Arthur Hearn had been found dead in his front yard decades earlier. He was wearing a gray coat and a brown hat. The police report said he'd just been standing by his fence when his heart gave out. The article ended by saying that for years, neighbors had claimed they still saw him sometimes in the evenings, waving at children who rode past on their bikes. Even now, all these years later, when I'm riding my bike through a quiet neighborhood, I catch myself glancing toward the corners. I'm half expecting to see him, a man in a brown hat, just watching. And every time, I tell myself that if I ever do see him again, I won't wave back. But deep down, I have a feeling he'd still know my name. Thanks for listening to my story. If you have any chilling experiences of your own, I'd love to read them in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more strange tales. Stay safe out there.